I believe that websites are still important because they are the method for which the brand can get their message out unfiltered, right? So I tell people your website, speaking to a brand, this is the one place on the internet that you own and control. It is the place where you can tell your story and you can build up the most authority, if you will, for your brand. So this is really important. And I also advise brands to treat their websites as business assets. It is not just another marketing channel. This is a business asset and it should be making you money. So that's another thing. We talk about analytics and how to attribute that traffic properly and make sure that the website is getting the credit it's due. It should not be just a cost center. So you have to invest in it, just like any building or other physical plant or equipment you might have, right? I'm in a building. If I don't fix the roof, eventually it's going to start to leak and then it's not going to be usable anymore. It's the same thing with your website. If you don't invest in it, it's going to end up falling apart.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Hi, I'm Kevin Lee with the E-Marketing Association. Long before I bought the E-Marketing Association, I started Did It in 1996 to do SEO before Google was even founded, and started actually experimenting with SEO back in 1994. So I'm super excited to have Elmer Boutin with me today because he goes back just about as far as I do in the wonderful world of SEO, pre-Google, and wanted to talk about some of the latest stuff going on in the world of SEO. So, Elmer, what has changed in the last year or two from the perspective of SEO that folks perhaps are missing who are engaged in the practice of SEO?
Boy, that's a big question. What hasn't changed? Some things have not. Some things still are quite valid, and some things are like, oh my goodness, it's completely different. So I liken these times to when Google first came on the scene and how quickly things changed and evolved at that point. So you're one of the few people I know that go back that far and are willing to admit it. Because I started doing SEO in 1996, the same year you launched Did It. And I remember, coding websites using Notepad and just handcrafting HTML because that was the way we did it back then. And, updating websites for directories was very different than updating websites for Alta Vista, which ultimately changed, and it was different than updating websites for Google. And as Google evolved during that time, how many people remember every Friday when Google would update the algorithm and we could go and check the search results to see what happened? That's where the term Google Dance came from, because that's what we started to call it. It was the Friday Google Dance. Now I see a lot of similarities, right? So Google and Bing are changing like crazy with additions of AI overviews and different other AI features that are coming in, constant experimentation, which is great. Nothing wrong with that, but it kind of throws us SEO people into a bit of a loop because we're having to really watch what's going on. But then we also have the introduction and evolution of different AI search tools like Perplexity and Claude and those that are out there, maybe not necessarily seeking to supplant Google and Bing. Maybe they are, right? They got a business model, they got to make money, right? But kind of looking at how they are taking and shaping consumer research processes. So one of the things that I talked about in a recent webinar I did for Milestone was talking about how the messy middle, used to seem like it took forever. So if you think about consumer research and how long it takes somebody to research a purchase that to them is very expensive, it can seem like it takes forever because they want to get the best information so they can make the best decision for themselves. But with this AI coming on board, makes it more efficient for them to get the answers that they need. Now, whether those answers are right or not is another story. We can talk about that at another time. But that messy middle timeline looks like it's going to be compressed, which is helpful in some ways, for those of us that work with websites and businesses that have long lead times, but maybe not. So a lot of the optimization pieces and the consumer behavior pieces have changed. But then kind of going back on technical SEO, which is still the foundation for everything, a lot of that hasn't changed. In fact, in some ways, it's gone backwards.
Yeah, I'd love you to double down on that. I mean, we all thought maybe 15 years ago that once CMSs sort of standardized and fixed themselves to where you wouldn't have those silly CMSs that had frames and flash in them, that okay, now it would be super easy, and
Oh,
you know
Flash.
you could you could just go ahead and use an out of the box CMS and never have to think that much about technical SEO. But oddly enough, um, it's still such a key element. Crawlability is the foundation, and so that has all sorts of implication on information architecture as well as technical SEO. So I'd love you to double down a little bit on that.
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that perspective. So I remember several years ago, somebody started sharing out the pyramid model of SEO, right? With technical SEO as the foundation, with content as the middle layer, and then offsite type activities at the top. And the way I still use that model. I don't know who invented that model or who introduced it or who came up with it, but thank you for whoever did that, because it's a real easy way to show non-technical people how SEO needs to be prioritized and also how it needs to be looked at from a functional perspective. Right. So a lot of people go in and they look at content first. And it's like, well, then you can't index your site, then your content isn't really helpful, is it? It's not doing you any good. So yeah, that technical foundation really comes into play. So indexability, efficiency, right? When I look at Core Web Vitals and I think, yes, this is a user experience thing for sure, but this is also a bot experience thing. So if you have code, it takes too long to download, you have a lot of unused code, if it's slow, that makes the bots very inefficient. Well, maybe we don't worry about that as much with Google and Bing because they have a lot of resources, although they aren't limitless. Um, but then if you look at some of the other newer AI search tools and how they're crawling, they have very limited resources. So efficiency is really critical for them. The other thing that came out recently is that a lot of the AI bots don't render JavaScript, right? So we've become a very JavaScript centric platform. Um, and I say we in the sense of the internet as a whole. There's a lot of really JavaScript heavy platforms out there, which are fantastic, but they do require a lot of extra work to optimize because sometimes they can be slow and clunky and non-indexable. But on the other hand, if we have bots that don't render JavaScript, we're kind of going back a few years in SEO to where when Google and Bing didn't render JavaScript. That was a challenging time. So pre-rendering and caching plain text HTML and serving that up as much as you can becomes critical again. But we can also look at that as being, well, it's better for user experience too. It's way more efficient for the end user, especially if they're on a mobile device. Sometimes if they've got to download and render a whole bunch of JavaScript in their phone, if they're not on an unlimited data plan, that can be harmful to them from an economic perspective. So, efficiency is really important. And those are two things that I've been stressing quite a bit of late.
Yeah, I'd love to talk a little bit about sort of uh, depth of content, right? You talk about limited, not limitless resources, meaning every engine needs to make a decision how deep to crawl a site, right? And so that has implications on the sort of editorial policies of the site with regards to how much content they create and also how much content they choose to leave on their site, as well as how you get to that content. In other words, how many layers deep do you need to go before you find that article from 2004, right? Or that was written. And then is that article or is that content still relevant in some way. So it has the implications of pruning. So that
Mhm.
brings that relates to information architecture. It relates to crawlability. It relates to pruning. There are all these implications to helping Google decide what
Mhm.
is in fact most important on my site, or some things completely unimportant. Should people, prune or use robots.txt, or like how should they think about if they have a legacy website that's been around 15 or 20 or 25
Mhm.
years, you know, obviously they probably changed CMSs a bunch of times. So the original
Probably.
URL from that period has probably been 301 4 times already.
Mhm.
So, there are implications to navigability and information architecture. So I'd love you to talk a little bit more about when you go in and somebody's got a legacy website and
Mhm.
it's got, that old content, how do you help them think through that process of, what do you do with it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's a discussion that I've had many times in the recent past, especially after that. I don't know how to describe it, controversy about pruning content that was that last year or the year before. I remember that was a big discussion in the SEO world. And
Yeah.
and and it was a good discussion to have because this is a valid question. If you're writing content and you said like going back to 2004, how valid is that content? Um, you look back on it and say, well, I don't know. I mean, if it's, 10, 12, 14, 20 years old, how valuable could it be? And this kind of goes back to the standard SEO answer that I know you're very familiar with, and that is it depends. So, and I know that drives people crazy. Why do you always answer it depends? Because everything has to be looked at in context. What's the purpose of the website? What's the business trying to accomplish? What have the users or customers of that business trying to accomplish? Tech stacks and all this stuff. All these things play into SEO decisions. And that's why there's never a one trick pony answer to anything, right? There's no one thing that can necessarily solve everybody's problem. It's usually a combination of things. So kind of going back to address the question more directly, is that you have to really go back and look at the content and see if it's worth keeping. Is it like completely out of date? Is it completely irrelevant? And then, looking at the decision whether or not you redirect it or let it 404, let it just delete it. Sometimes a 404 is very appropriate. If you started building content in 2004 and it's now 2025, there is a really good likelihood that whatever you wrote in 2004 may be completely irrelevant to what you are doing now. Maybe it's better just to let it go and just get it out of the index and prune it out, saving, potentially saving crawl budget. I mean, but if there is content that's closely related, then yeah, go ahead and redirect it to something newer. That totally makes sense. That's good for users. That's good for the bots. And eventually it's going to be good for your search performance. So that's kind of how I look at it. Um, and again, it's not a one size fits all thing. You really have to take a deep dive into it. And I think this is where some people might get into trouble is that they look at things very myopically, right? They kind of focus in on one thing and get, microscope into it. Sometimes that's needed. I don't want to, totally say that's a terrible thing to do, but you also have to take a step back and take that 10,000-foot view of what's going on and really look at the entire digital ecosystem to understand what's going on. And then that helps you make better decisions because now you understand this is where we are now, this is where we were before. How do we, get our old content out of there? So yeah, that's kind of the way I look at it. You talk about information architecture, and that's something that I know I've had several spirited discussions around directory structure in the past. I know a lot of SEO people who are really good SEO people who believe that a flat directory structure is more helpful. My opinion is that an organized and logical directory structure is better. And every time I've taken a website that had a flat architecture and reorganized it into logical categorical groups, I've seen an increase in traffic from organic search. Now, it may be a little or it may be a lot. Sometimes it's like, man, we really didn't get a lot of gain on that. Maybe it wasn't worth the effort. But by and large, most of the time, it's been very helpful. And I always recommend that, especially for a large website that's very complex. Um, I don't worry about folder structure as much as I worry about internal linking structure, because that's the more important part of how to get people to the content faster and more efficiently. It's the internal linking structure. And, a lot of people look at it like, well, if this is like 4 folders deep, that's a bad thing. It's like, well, is it 4 clicks from the website? That's how I look at it. So it's a little bit different way of looking at it. But again, it's logic is logic. And if you feed logic into a system that works off of logic, you're likely going to benefit.
That's a great point. And you used the word helpful a couple of times, which of course in our world triggers us thinking about the helpful
Mhm.
content update, which was one of the more recent major algorithm updates that
Yeah.
Google made. And it was really interesting that they chose to name it that because it coincided with sort of the temptation for content creators to gravitate towards either fully AI generated content or content which is largely created by AI and then perhaps additionally tuned by a human. Um, and when I thought about that term, helpful content, and I thought about AI in that context, it occurred to me that AI content is by definition essentially regurgitated, right?
Yeah.
Because
It can be.
the AI is using existing content and creating new content as a result of
Mhm.
that. And so I sort of saw that as twofold, right? One, it was a reminder to the content and web and SEO community that the content should be great and it should be novel, but not
Mhm.
just novel as in
Yeah.
these words are in a different order, but novel in a sense that it was helpful to consumers or to searchers. So
Yeah.
I'd love to get your thought on that and what the implications are to those content managers who have that daily temptation to rest their, use AI as a crutch for content
Yeah.
creation.
Well, I mean, I don't think you should use any tool as a crutch, right? The human brain is still better at doing a lot of things than AI. Um, my friend Andrew, who I used to work with, added unique to helpful. So he recommended, and I started adopting this too, is I'm all about borrowing great ideas and giving credit. So Andrew, I'm giving you credit for that one. But he always talked about creating uniquely helpful content. And I think that adds an extra layer on top of that, to the point that you were just trying to make. Just simply regurgitating content and reordering the words, or maybe taking an article and trying to make it 10% better, isn't going to cut it anymore. It may have worked in the past. It's not going to work moving forward. It has to be a little bit more unique. I think it was Mike King who pointed out some of the Google writings about information gain. If it wasn't Mike, whoever it was, I apologize. But that is another thing to consider as you're writing content, especially those that are writing in the YMYL space. You have to really think about these things, because if you're merely regurgitating and just generating AI fluff content, you're going to fail. There's just no doubt about it. It may work for a short time, but eventually the algorithm's going to catch up to that. So uniquely helpful content is the key to everything here. And I know sometimes that's difficult. Like we often talk about location pages where you have a business that has 100 or 1,000 locations and they offer the exact same products and services at every location. How do you make that uniquely helpful? That's a challenge that AI can potentially help with, because you can train an AI to go and look at what's going on in the area around this location and add some helpful, unique content to it. So that's an area where AI can help a lot. And I've seen some examples of that being used quite successfully. We've talked about that just very recently, because it's a good way. So that's using a tool in the way that it can be helpful, not using it as a crutch.
Absolutely. Great
Mhm.
point. One other fun thing, obviously, for the industry where it's almost like a rebirth of the web visibility, industry, and I sort of use that more broadly than SEO, is that the LLM or AI or generative engines, right, are using different algorithms to decide
Mhm.
how to answer a query.
Yeah, they're
And
completely different.
yeah,
Yeah.
and those engines rely on signals in a very different way than the
Hmm.
signals that Google and Bing have been using. So, as a result of that, content that's syndicated out and co-created by a marketer ends up being just as important or potentially even more important than on-site content to the LLMs, right? Because the LLMs
Yeah.
are essentially probabilistically looking for a consensus on something,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And for those of us who've been in SEO for a long time, you know, we then flash back to this idea of barnacle SEO, which is, well, the
Hmm.
SERP has a lot more positions than just one, right?
Yeah.
And so if I've got content that's out there and it's helpful and it happens to be syndicated on a publisher site or it was co-created with a partner, and that's the one that ranks as long as it talks about me in a favorable manner, an accurate manner.
Hmm.
That's good. I mean, that's
Yeah.
maybe one extra click to get to my website, or even if it's not anchor linked at all, it's still one other positive mention about the
Hmm.
company. And so I've
Yeah.
seen that as essentially that reality has become this sort of trigger for a resurgence in digital PR and
Yeah.
this idea of barnacle SEO, the idea that, okay,
Hmm.
I can't, if I really want to do web visibility, which is sort of, tangential to SEO, and I want to do either AIO or GEO, depending on which term you want to use for it, I
Hmm.
want to start to make sure that I'm increasing the odds that I show up in a chatbot answer. Um,
Yeah.
I need to think a lot about my content syndication strategy. And I'd love to,
Hmm.
dive a little bit more deeply into that as it relates to allocation of resources, right? Because if you're still doing SEO, on-site SEO, including technical SEO and a content calendar that relates to your website, how should one then prioritize the ideas of syndicated content, or even deciding, hey, here's a great piece of content, where should it live? It can have a home, and then it can have perhaps a second home where it's synopsized in a second home, right? Because it's
Hmm.
still valuable for some of the abstracts about the content to live somewhere else. So, how are you advising folks to think about that?
Um, yeah, that is an excellent question. And again, these are discussions that we have quite often, when we're talking about how to build out content. So I believe that websites are still important because they are the method for which the brand can get their message out unfiltered, right? So I tell people your website, speaking to a brand, this is the one place on the internet that you own and control. It is the place where you can tell your story and you can build up the most authority, if you will, for your brand. So this is really important. And I also advise brands to treat their websites as business assets. It is not just another marketing channel. This is a business asset and it should be making you money. So that's another thing. We talk about analytics and how to attribute that traffic properly and make sure that the website is getting the credit it's due. It should not be just a cost center. So you have to invest in it. Just like any building or other physical plant or equipment you might have, right? I'm in a building. If I don't fix the roof, eventually it's going to start to leak and then it's not going to be usable anymore. It's the same thing with your website. If you don't invest in it, it's going to end up falling apart. So, long way of going around to saying that yes, I think that we should be looking at website first because that's the place that we own and control. But you bring up digital PR, that is a very critical thing to consider, right? So if you think about the pyramid again, digital PR would be at the top. Because digital PR takes a lot of work to do it properly, right? You can't just, it's the same thing with link building. If you're doing link building properly, it's very time and labor intensive. You're not, I mean, yeah, I can go out tomorrow and buy a whole bunch of crap links and it cost me $50. It's not a big deal. But if I'm going to build good, high quality, relevant links, then yeah, that takes time and effort. And digital PR is very similar. But this is a very critical aspect to this, though, right? So even Google's talking about brand mentions. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether brand mentions are more important than links or if they're equal or maybe less or so. And we can debate that for days. I don't know, so I don't want to get into that right now. But with the LLM models and the scenario that you just described, digital PR becomes very, very important because if you think about how consumers are doing their research through that messy middle process, the more often they see a brand mentioned favorably somewhere, the more likely they are to remember it and keep it in their consideration set, and then eventually go to Google and type in the brand name and come to the website, which is the place that the brand owns and controls. Right? That's where a lot of your conversions may happen. So that's where a lot of your business is going to be conducted online. So that's just a long way of coming around to saying, yes, I agree with you. And this is kind of my thought process when I start talking to brands about content and how to relate that back to SEO or GEO or whatever we decide to call it. I don't know. I still look at the LLMs as search tools. So, I mean, are they search engines in the traditional sense? I don't know. I've started referring to Google and Bing as incumbent search engines and all the LLM models as search tools. That could change tomorrow. That's the way I'm talking about it now. I hate to say traditional, right? I heard somebody say traditional search engines like Google and Bing, but they've only been around for, a little over 20 years. They're still kind of new to me.
That's a great point. In certain industries and for certain clients, which we both have clients, and certainly under my Did It hat, I have clients.
Mhm.
Occasionally come across a client where they have sort of the equivalent of writer's block, right? And they're like,
Mm,
we don't have anything new to talk about, right? Uh,
yeah.
we're in the accounting business, and so occasionally FASB makes an update, but other than that, like what do
Mhm.
I talk about? And you know I find it actually sort of fun, showing them that that's not true, right?
Yeah. That's
Because
a great use of an AI tool, right?
yeah.
Because getting topics and recommended topics for your website, I mean, you can run that and have them do a gap analysis. What are your competitors not talking about that you should be talking about? That's a very powerful tool that just a few years ago would have been very labor intensive and would have taken a really long time to do well. Now that we've got AI engines and we can write agents to go out and look at that stuff and give us a report back in minutes. I mean, it might take more than a few minutes to create the agents and set up the logic, but once we train it, boom, we're off to the races.
Yeah,
Oh
that's
my
that's a great
goodness. I
point.
just dated myself with that saying, didn't I?
I wanted to jump into sort of, an area that people sometimes forget, and it's also an area that they forget because they think they're in a sort of perhaps non-sexy category from a visual perspective, which is the fact that YouTube is the second largest search engine at the moment, right? It may not,
Yeah.
it may not
That's
really
another
act like it.
arguable point.
Yeah,
Is it
it may
really a
not, it
search
may not
engine?
be
But
engaged
I
with as a
I
search
get your
engine.
I get your point, Kevin.
Yeah.
I agree with your point.
Yeah, I mean, or let's say it's a large video asset repository, right? And
Yeah.
because of the way Google works, whether the people chose to engage with YouTube as a search engine, which many of them don't, right? They rely on notifications, and it
Mhm.
looks a lot more like social media from many angles, but it has a
Yeah.
search box, right? But more
Yeah.
importantly, Google, when they believe that video answers the question or delights the searcher, will
Mhm.
surface video content. And I still find marketers completely ignoring video, right?
Mhm.
And maybe
Yeah.
it's a right decision for them, maybe it isn't. But when they're in a category where all their competitors are ignoring video, uh, I found that sometimes, video is actually a better investment than you would think, especially now that
Mhm.
consumers are willing to accept a different level of production value on video than they might have in the past. And the ease of creating good production value has
Yeah.
has gotten to be a lot easier, right? So when I,
Mhm.
when I started the digital marketing in 94, If you said to somebody, we're going to have to shoot a video, immediately they're thinking 5,000 baseline, right? To shoot
Oh
anything,
yeah,
right?
yeah, because they're thinking traditional media.
Yeah,
But I
right.
mean, the investment to a decent microphone and a high def camera is really low. I mean, the
Yeah,
bar to
exactly.
entry for the equipment is negligible at this point. So, and you're right. I mean, people, as long as it's got decent audio and decent video, it's, you're not all dark and hidden in the background, or, you have a halfway decent mic, and that's really what works. And I agree with you. I think video can be a huge boon to a lot of businesses. And it is one that is ignored because a lot of brands consider that the bar to entry is too high. But video gives you a couple of really neat opportunities, especially if you put it on YouTube. Number one, it is highly searchable. And again, we can debate whether YouTube's a search engine or a social channel or whatever. But the fact is, they get a lot of traffic, and Google does favor YouTube videos in the search results. I mean, that's easily seen, and I think pretty much indisputable. The other good thing you can get about a video that you can host on YouTube is you can embed it in your website. That's huge right there. And you get double duty out of it then, right? Because you can embed it in your website, you can mark it up with schema, you can put some content around it to make it very helpful, uniquely helpful, to continue to borrow my friend Andrew's term. And you can push that out there and you get double duty out of it, right? You can potentially rank for both. Maybe in a video carousel you get one, but maybe in the regular search results you get a good result in the organic listings for something that you created that answers both questions. Some people are very visual learners. Some people are audio learners. Some people want to read. There are different aspects, and being able to take that and reach out to a broader audience is a great thing, number one. But number two, having that video and embedding it in your website just brings some great advantages that I think a lot of people miss out on, because they think, oh, if I make a video, I put it on YouTube and I'm done. Like, well, no, pull it into your website, write an article around it, right? Add a little bit more flavor, a little bit more depth, make it more uniquely helpful, and then you can have a great, I don't know, double aspect to it, right? You get a multiplier out of it.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see whether a third multiplier of that is the fact that YouTube transcriptions are there, right? And so Google
Yeah.
obviously knows about the YouTube transcriptions.
Hmm.
And that now takes the video content and turns it into textual content,
Yeah.
which Google may or may not be using in Gemini, right? As an
Hmm.
additional data source of unique video tends to be unique. These conversations we're having tend to be unique, right? Maybe something
Right.
we've said is actually helpful or interesting or apropos, right? Whether or not
Absolutely.
that's getting ingested for the purposes of the Gemini algorithm or not as a data source, only Google knows for sure, but we also know that probably Google is not letting the other LLMs in to crawl unless they're, violating robots.txt, is not letting the other LLMs like Chat
Hmm.
and Claude in to read the transcripts of these videos.
Hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see, as the data starts to unfold, whether the additional third benefit, beyond visibility in YouTube, using the videos and embedding them, the third, benefit may be the fact that the transcripts of those videos have significant value just residing in YouTube. And to your
Hmm.
earlier point about, writing an article about the video, the fact that you can then take the transcription and perhaps use AI to summarize it if you don't have the time to
Yeah.
summarize it yourself, right, is a great way to
Another great
just
use of AI that's not just
exactly.
regurgitating content.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, what else should folks be thinking about as it relates to the next generation of web visibility? Which will
Yeah.
include,
Hmm.
SEO and thinking about LLM algorithms, and many people are calling it GEO, generative engine
Yeah.
optimization, but most people are calling it AIO, I think, in the
Yeah.
industry.
I mean, you can call it whatever you want, right? It's a rose by any other name. It's still kind of the same thing. The other thing that tell people to watch for is looking at how traffic to your website is performing from a business perspective. Oh, a lot of people use like, ranking reports and, inbound clicks as KPIs. And those are great measurements. Don't get me wrong, I still look at those things. They're very important, but they're not business KPIs, right? Traffic for
Mhm.
traffic's sake is no good. Though I will often say I would rather have 100 visits that convert than 1,000 visits that do not convert. Now, I want people to come to the website. So if you're going to go through all of the trouble to optimize a website, optimize your digital presence, get people to come to your website, you want them to do something, right? So this kind of goes back to what I said earlier about, websites are not just a cost center. They can be an asset to the business. They can add to the bottom line. So measuring traffic accurately and what they're doing brings in a conversation about conversion rate optimization, which I am by no means an authority on, but I know enough to know that I can spot really bad conversion optimization and refer them over to somebody who does a better job of it. So, I have a whole team of people I can refer to at my current place, Milestone, who can help do that, and they do it very well. Testing is really important, right? We've always talked about testing, and very few people actually do it. But testing, especially conversion optimization testing, is critical. You have to be able to see how that traffic is flowing through your system and making sure that people who come to your website are doing what you need them to do in order for your business to be successful.
Yeah,
And yeah,
that's a great point.
this is something that we should have always been doing, but I've never seen an emphasis, or I shouldn't say I've never seen an emphasis. I've seen very little emphasis on it, right? We always tend to gravitate towards traffic metrics, which are really easy to measure and really easy to show. And we can show improvements. Hey, we started out at this level, now we're at this level. And that's wonderful, but that should not be the only thing you rely on. I mean, I kind of look at ranking reports anymore as a diagnostic tool for me rather than something to report to a client because
Yeah,
it
I
gets
had
muddled.
I'm laughing because I had a conversation with a prospect recently whose senior management wanted to judge, an SEO engagement were we to take on the business purely based on traffic lift.
Hmm.
And I pointed out that there were some interesting case studies they had written with clients that had keyword terms in them that related to some very popular products at the client.
Mm.
And
Hmm.
therefore, they were ranking maybe in the top five for those
Yeah.
very popular product searches, even though they were just a service provider to the retailer. In other
Hmm.
words, it wasn't actually all that relevant. And I said, well, I could double your search traffic by just boosting 3 pages that happen to rank well for terms surrounding a product that you have nothing to do with.
Yeah.
And it will not move your business needle at all. It will drive your traffic through the roof, but it won't drive your business
Right.
one iota. So I think you should think more about, to your point, business KPIs. Like not all traffic is created equal. We know that just without thinking about it very much,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So to rely on traffic as the primary metric for SEO
Hmm.
success is really misguided. And I think you
Hmm.
make that really valid point that one shouldn't just think about traffic and brag about the traffic lift, right? One should think
Yeah.
about from a priorities perspective when one's looking at either third-party tools or Google Webmaster Tools,
Hmm.
and you're seeing opportunities to potentially move, certain content a little bit higher in the search results, perhaps with a little bit of tweaking, then we're
Yeah.
not, don't just think about it from the perspective, oh, wouldn't it be great if I got more traffic on this page? Well,
Yeah.
maybe it would be, or maybe it wouldn't be, because if it's not relevant
Hmm.
to driving business results, no, it actually, you can get patted on the back, you can get your bonus, but you haven't
Hmm.
actually helped your business.
Exactly. So I had a great example of this just last year. We were implementing topical schema on pages for a website we were supporting. And on one of, actually, it was two or three of the main product pages, we added this topical schema. And we expected traffic to go up, and on most pages where we implemented this schema, it actually did go up. But on these particular pages, the traffic went down, and I thought, wow, man, these are important pages. Well, this is bad. when we started digging into the numbers and what was actually going on, we were noticing that before we implemented the topical schema, that page or those pages were ranking for terms that were irrelevant to what the client actually offered. It was just fluff traffic. However, when afterwards we noticed that the traffic from those queries disappeared, and they were totally irrelevant. However, the traffic on the actual keywords that we wanted to do well on actually went up a little bit, but the offset was an overall net loss. Then when we dug it even further, found that, oh, this is interesting. All the conversion rates on those pages started going up significantly, right? So that's a great example of, yeah, we got lower traffic, but we got more conversions and more business out of it. And so, yeah, you and I definitely see eye to eye. To me, that's the more important thing. Would I love more traffic? Sure, I can brag about that all day long, but if I can help impact the bottom line, everybody wins because, the business is successful. People, are less likely to get laid off. I'm likely to keep my client. Everybody's happy.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a great conversation, Elmer. We've taken a snapshot of where we are in SEO here, almost 30 years later.
Oh my goodness, please don't say that, Kevin.
So yeah, I think it's more exciting than ever, actually. A good chunk of the business that did it, my primary gig is still SEO and now web visibility, for LLMs as well. So it's still exciting to get up in the morning and help folks get their great content visible.
Absolutely. No, and I started here with Milestone, just in January. And it's just a lot of exciting things going on around technical SEO. We've got a great CMS. We've got a schema product that's really helpful, and we've got several other products and services that we offer that are really great at helping increase that visibility. So yeah, we're doing a lot of really exciting work. Yeah, and you mentioned doing this for darn near 30 years for me, and over 30 for you, but I'm still excited. It's still fun, and I'm still learning, which is great because you can tell I'm a little long in the tooth, as the old saying goes, and that makes it fun. Absolutely, I'm with you right there, Kevin. It just makes this job really interesting and fun and exciting.
Yeah, thanks a lot for joining me, Elmer. Look forward to catching up again soon.
Great, thank you, appreciate it.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.